The body hit the ground with a sound Dean Martin would never forget. Not the crack of breaking bones, not the thud of impact, but the silence that followed. The terrible, suffocating silence of a movie set frozen in horror while a man lay motionless in the Arizona dust. July 23, 1958. Old Tucson Studios. The temperature was pushing 112 degrees. Dean Martin, John Wayne, and director Howard Hawks were 6 weeks into production on Rio Bravo, a western that would become one of the greatest films ever made. But what happened that afternoon had nothing to do with movies. It had everything to do with the kind of man Dean Martin really was when nobody expected him to be anything at all. To understand what happened, you need to understand Hollywood in 1958. The studio system was absolute. Warner Brothers, MGM, Paramount, these weren't just companies. They were empires. They owned the theaters, the distribution, the stars. If you crossed them, they could end your career with a single phone call. Extras and stunt performers existed at the bottom of this food chain. They were bodies, nothing more. Interchangeable parts in a machine. If one broke, you replaced it and kept shooting. Nobody cared about their medical bills. Nobody cared about their families. They signed waivers saying the studio wasn't responsible for anything, and if they didn't like it, 100 other hungry nobodies waited to take their place. Dean Martin knew this system intimately. He'd grown up in Steubenville, Ohio, a steel town where working men got chewed up by machines every day. He understood what it meant to be invisible to the people who held power, but he'd never had the standing to do anything about it. After the split with Jerry Lewis, he'd been damaged goods, a singer trying to prove he could act. He needed the studios more than they needed him. Rio Bravo was supposed to change that. John Wayne had personally requested Dean for the role of Dude, a recovering alcoholic deputy. It was the kind of part that could legitimize him as a serious actor. The kind of part you didn't risk by causing trouble. So Dean showed up every day, hit his marks, and kept his mouth shut, until Tommy Mitchell hit the ground. Tommy was a 34-year-old former rodeo rider from Tucson. He'd been doing stunt work for 5 years, picking up whatever jobs he could find. He had a wife named Sarah and 2 little girls, ages 4 and 7. Working with John Wayne and Dean Martin was the kind of credit that could change a stuntman's career. His job that day was simple. During a bar fight scene, 2 stuntmen would throw him through a breakaway window. He'd hit the ground outside the saloon, roll twice, and stay down. The breakaway window was made of sugar glass designed to shatter safely. The frame was supposed to be balsa wood, built to splinter on impact. Standard Hollywood trick. But what Tommy didn't know, what nobody knew, was that the construction crew had made a mistake. The window frame wasn't balsa, wood. Someone had grabbed the wrong piece from storage. This frame was reinforced with metal supports, built for a different scene entirely. From the outside, both frames looked identical. Nobody checked. In the rush to stay on schedule, nobody asked the question that could have saved Tommy Mitchell's spine. The assistant director called action. The bar fight erupted, and right on cue, 2 stuntmen grabbed Tommy and hurled him toward that window. The sugar glass shattered perfectly, but the frame didn't give. The metal supports caught Tommy mid-flight, stopping his upper body while his legs kept moving. His spine twisted at an angle spines aren't meant to twist. That wet cracking sound echoed across the desert silence. Tommy's body cartwheeled through the air and dropped 12 feet onto the hard-packed dirt. He didn't roll. He didn't move. He just lay there, dust settling around him like a shroud. For 3 seconds, the entire set was frozen. Then chaos erupted. The stunt coordinator sprinted toward Tommy. The medic grabbed his bag and ran. Dean pushed through the crowd until he could see Tommy's face. The man was conscious, but barely. His left arm was bent wrong. Blood poured from a gash on his forehead. But the worst part was his legs. They weren't moving. The medic said the words everyone feared. "We need an ambulance now. Don't move him. This could be spinal." That's when Gerald Foster appeared. Foster was Warner Brothers' production manager, the studio's eyes and ears on set. His job was keeping production on budget and on schedule. He was a thin man in his late 40s with wire-rimmed glasses and a permanent expression of impatience. Foster took one look at Tommy on the ground and said something that made Dean Martin's blood run cold. "Get him off my set." The medic looked up, incredulous. "What?" "Put him in someone's car and take him to the hospital. We're burning daylight." "Sir, he could have a spinal injury if we move him wrong." "Then move him." Right. Every minute we're not shooting costs this studio $10,000. Get him out of here and reset the scene. He turned to his assistant. And find out who grabbed the wrong frame. They're fired. No questions about whether Tommy would be okay. No concern for his family. Just get him off my set like he was a broken prop. Dean Martin was standing 8 feet away. He heard every word. Something inside him went very quiet. Not the explosive kind of anger. The cold kind. The kind that doesn't care about consequences. Dean walked toward Foster. Crew members stepped aside without being asked. What hospital are they taking him to? Foster barely glanced at him. Tucson General, I assume. Why? Who's paying for it? Now Foster turned. That's not our concern. He signed a waiver. These men know the risks. So the studio's not covering his medical bills? The studio provides on-set medical care. Anything beyond that is his responsibility. Foster's voice was condescending. That's standard industry practice. Now, if you don't mind, Mr. Martin, we need to reset this scene. Dean looked at Tommy on the ground. The medic was immobilizing his neck. Tommy's eyes were closed. His wife didn't know yet. His daughters didn't know yet. Dean turned back to Foster. Reset the scene without me. The silence was absolute. Foster's face went through several colors. Confusion, disbelief, then cold anger. Excuse me? You heard me. I'm not shooting another frame until that man's medical bills are covered. All of them. The entire set had stopped. John Wayne emerged from his trailer. He stood at the edge of the crowd watching. Howard Hawks set down his script. Foster tried to laugh. Dean, come on. The man signed a waiver. This is how the industry works. Not anymore, it doesn't. You have a contract. You can't just refuse to work. Dean removed his cowboy hat and handed it to a nearby crew member. Watch me. Foster stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried across the silent set. You walk off this production and you'll never work in this town again. Do you understand? Warner Brothers will bury you. One phone call to every studio in Hollywood. You'll be finished. Dean didn't flinch. Then I guess I'm finished. You're throwing away your career for a stuntman you don't even know. I'm throwing away my career for a man with 2 little girls who's about to go bankrupt because your props department grabbed the wrong window frame. Foster's face twisted. This is insane. Maybe, Dean shrugged. That famous Dean Martin shrug. But here's what's going to happen. Either Warner Brothers pays every penny of Tommy Mitchell's medical bills, or I walk. Right now. He paused. And I don't walk quietly. I have friends at every newspaper in Los Angeles. I'll tell every reporter exactly what happened here. How a man got crippled because your crew couldn't check a window frame, and how Warner Brothers said it was his problem. Dean took a step closer. You want to talk about what costs money? How about that headline? Warner Brothers abandons injured stuntman. You think the papers won't eat that up? Foster's face had gone gray. You're bluffing. Call it. The silence stretched. 5 seconds. 10. And then John Wayne moved. The Duke didn't say a word. He just walked, that distinctive John Wayne walk, across the set until he was standing next to Dean Martin, shoulder to shoulder. He looked at Foster and didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Howard Hawks walked over, stood on Dean's other side. The stunt coordinator followed, then the cinematographer, then the key grip, the gaffer, the makeup artist. One by one, the crew of Rio Bravo walked away from their positions and stood behind Dean Martin. Not because anyone told them to, because they'd spent their lives watching men get chewed up by studios, and for the first time, someone with power was doing something about it. Foster looked around at the faces. He was outnumbered. If Dean walked, the movie was dead. If Wayne walked with him, Warner Brothers would lose everything. Foster pulled out a handkerchief and wiped his face. His hand was trembling. I need to make a call. He disappeared into the production office. Dean didn't move. The crew didn't reset the scene. The entire production was frozen, tens of thousands of dollars burning with every minute, but nobody cared about the money. Something bigger was happening. 20 minutes later, Foster emerged. His shoulders were slumped. Warner Brothers will cover Mr. Mitchell's medical expenses, all of them, and we'll be reviewing our insurance policies. Dean nodded. I want that in writing, today. You'll have it by end of business. And I want to know Tommy's condition before we shoot another frame. Foster nodded and walked away. Dean turned to the crew. Anybody here ever been hurt on a set and had to pay your own medical bills? Slowly, hands started going up. 1, 3. 8, 12, more than half the crew. Dean looked at the raised hands for a long moment. Howard Hawks cleared his throat. Let's take the rest of the day. We'll resume tomorrow. As the crew dispersed, John Wayne pulled Dean aside. That was the gutsiest thing I've ever seen on a movie set. Dean shrugged. It needed doing. You know, you just made yourself a target. The studios are going to remember this. Then they remember it. I'm tired of pretending I don't see what's happening to people. Wayne studied him, then extended his hand. You're all right, Martin. You're really all right. That night, Dean drove to Tucson General Hospital. He didn't have to. Nobody expected him to. The crisis was resolved. He could have gone back to his hotel, had a drink, gotten some sleep before tomorrow's early call. But something pulled him to that hospital, something he couldn't name. He found Sarah Mitchell in the waiting room, alone, clutching a hospital bill estimate. $18,000. Her eyes were red and swollen. Her hands were shaking. Dean sat down next to her. Mrs. Mitchell, I'm Dean Martin. I was there when your husband got hurt. Sarah looked up with hollow eyes. The doctors say he might never walk right again, and this. She held up the estimate. $18,000. We can't. Dean gently took the paper from her hand. Mrs. Mitchell, I need you to listen carefully. Warner Brothers is paying for everything, every penny. Surgery, rehabilitation, lost wages. You're not going to owe anyone anything. Sarah stared at him. What? The studio sent a lawyer. He said Tommy signed a waiver. The lawyer was wrong. The studio made a mistake, and they're taking responsibility. But how? Dean smiled. Let's just say we had a conversation about what's right, and they saw things my way. Sarah started to cry. Not despair this time, relief. Dean stayed with her for 3 hours, sitting in an uncomfortable plastic chair, drinking bad coffee that tasted like it had been brewing since yesterday, making small talk about her daughters, about Tucson, about anything that might take her mind off the surgery. Just being there, because nobody else from the production was. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Nurses walked past with quiet efficiency. And Dean Martin, in his civilian clothes, waited with a woman he'd never met, because someone needed to. When Tommy came out of surgery, the news was mixed. His arm would heal, though with limited mobility. His back, he would walk again, but with a limp, with pain. He would never do stunt work again. But Warner Brothers paid his bills, all $18,000, and 6 months later, they hired him as a stunt coordinator, a position where he could use his experience without risking his body. Rio Bravo resumed production the next day. Dean was quieter than usual on set, but he was there. The crew looked at him differently now, not as a movie star slumming it in a western, as a man who'd stood up when it mattered. The studio did try to retaliate. Dean's next 3 film offers mysteriously disappeared. Projects went to other actors. The blacklist was real, but Dean had John Wayne's loyalty. The Duke told everyone in Hollywood what had happened. He had Howard Hawks singing his praises, and he had the crew spreading the word through every production in town. Within 6 months, the blacklist faded. New offers came in, better than before. In 1959, the Screen Actors Guild pushed through new insurance requirements. Studios were required to carry comprehensive coverage for all performers, including extras and stunt workers. The change was directly influenced by what happened on Rio Bravo. Dean never took credit. When reporters asked, he waved them off. People make too much of it. I just didn't want some guy going bankrupt because of an accident. Tommy Mitchell sent Dean a Christmas card every year for 37 years, and every year Dean called him. When Dean Martin died on Christmas Day 1995, Tommy Mitchell was at the funeral. He was 71 years old, walking with a cane, his arm still crooked from that day in Arizona. A reporter asked what Dean Martin meant to him. Tommy was quiet for a long moment. Dean Martin saved my life, not just that day on the set, my whole life. He taught me that you don't have to be powerless just because someone tells you you are, the reporter pressed. But he was a big star. It was easy for him to take that risk. Tommy shook his head. No, it wasn't easy. He risked everything. His career, his reputation, his future, and he did it for me. A guy he'd never met. A guy who didn't matter to anyone except my family. He paused, looking at the mourners. That's not a big star move. That's a good man move. And Dean Martin was a good man. The story of Rio Bravo is usually told as a classic Western. John Wayne in his prime. Howard Hawks directing, Dean Martin proving he could act, not just sing. All of that is true. But there's another story buried in that film. A story that didn't make it into the press kits. A story about what happened when a man with power decided to use it for something other than himself. 60 seconds. That's all it took. 60 seconds of courage that changed how Hollywood treated the people nobody cared about. Dean Martin made a lot of movies. He sang a lot of songs. He made millions of people laugh. But on that day in the brutal Arizona heat, on a Western set that almost killed a man, Dean Martin did something more important than entertain anyone. He stood up, he spoke up, and he refused to let the machine grind up another human being. That's the king of cool.